Well, croeso, welcome to you all to this, well, virtual chat over a pint. I see Paul Jones and Chris Jones-Jenkins has already joined us at the bar. Just fetching my virtual pint, says Paul. Chris answered, mine's an orange juice. Yes, a virtual drive home. Right, guys. Mine's a G&T, please, and make space at the bar for a very special guest who I'll introduce in a mo. But just in case you've stumbled upon this session, well, this is going to be a celebration. I believe it'll be a revelation, a very enlightening session. Yes, celebrating a fairly recent acquisition by St Fagans Folk Museum, National Museum Wales. The forthcoming edition, well, in about 3 years' time, hopefully COVID-19 allowing, of the first ever pub to Wales's #1 visitors attraction. I say that because I always see it in these top 10s and top 5s. I love it. So many Welsh people have very, very, very emotional feelings about St Fagans, and perhaps it, well, may come as a shock to some that yes, St Fagans' first ever pub will be opening soon. Some, I'm sure, would be raising a glass of wine, announcing it's about time. Others scarcely believe, but others may think blasphemy. Why on earth are you bringing such a place to such a special place as St Fagans? Well, we're talking about the Vulcan Hotel. The pub, a 159-year-old pub, of course, that was based in Adamstown, just on the outskirts of the city centre in Cardiff. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly visited the Vulcan before it closed in 2012. And please, I can already see that people have joined us here. If you notice on the side of your screen, you'll see that we have the technology to receive any questions, any remarks, any bants that you would wish to share, because we've got here the Principal Curator of Historic Buildings at St Fagans, Dafydd Wiliam, to explain all. Croeso, welcome, Dafydd.
Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi.
Now, mine is a G&T. What's yours?
I'll have a pint, please.
Right, lovely. Thank you. Well, let's begin with that grand title, if you don't mind. For anyone out there like me who's never actually had the privilege or the pleasure to work at St Fagans, what on earth does the role of Principal Curator of Historic Buildings actually entail from day to day?
Well, myself and my colleagues oversee the interpretation of the historic buildings. We've got a collection of around 50, and each one provides context for the life lived within them. And I also oversee the maintenance of them, because obviously they're out in the rain and they need looking after. And then traditionally my role chooses buildings to build at St Fagans. But obviously I'd love to rescue as many buildings as possible, but we just can't. We haven't got the resources. So if we've already got a building that tells a particular story, then we've got no reason to collect a building similar to it. But every day is different and it's great fun. I really enjoy it.
So a pub, Dafydd, how long have you wanted a pub, or how long has the museum wished to add a pub to the rota of historic buildings at St Fagans? Has it been something, on the list of the bucket list, as it were?
It always has been on our hit list, if you like. Our first director, Iorwerth Pete, who was director between 1948 and about 1970, he said we should have a pub. They're essentially community centres. So where people can get together away from work, away from chapel, and be friends, make friends, and cement those bonds that keep a community together. So they're really important spaces.
Mm. So, the Vulcan.
Yes.
I guess my question involves something along the lines of, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the Vulcan always on your wish list, or had you actually craved a different pub? And how does it work?
Well, we've tried to get a couple of other pubs, and we've been in negotiations with people offering us pubs, but for various reasons, those have fallen through. Mm. So in 2012, when we were offered the pub, everything was right, the timing was right, and we were able to accept gratefully.
Just let us know right now, when was it acquired, and where are we at, in this project, if the hope is to open in 3 years' time?
Well, we collected the building in 2012 over a period of 3 months in the summer. And we've started building, and we're now at first floor level. So
right.
The joists of the first floor have gone in, and our team are progressing quite well, even though of lockdown.
Yeah.
We couldn't build for a while, but once conditions eased slightly, our team could go back in, and they call the Historic Buildings Unit. Mm. And as they're working outdoors, it's quite easy for them to maintain a distance between each other. And the build is going quite well.
Wonderful. Have you been able, as principal curator, have you been able to visit the site at all?
Yes, I was there recently. I was being interviewed for another program. So I got to see the work going on, and it's looking great.
Wow. Just before we concentrate fully on this acquisition, over the past 5 years, I believe you've been working in this role. Where else at St Fagans could we see that has been part of the time that you've been in this role?
Well, in the last few years, we've built 2 new buildings. And they're slightly different to our other collections of buildings because these are recreations based on archaeological remains. So the further back in time you go, the fewer buildings there are available to move that survive. So if we go back, say, 1,000 years or 2,000 years, only archaeological remains survive. So then our most recent buildings are a Bryn Area Iron Age farmstead, a couple of conjoined roundhouses, so 2 roundhouses stuck together from Anglesey, and Llys Llywelyn, a medieval prince's court, also from Anglesey, one of the halls of Llywelyn the Great. And the archaeology can take us so far. It gives us the ground plan of the building, and then the rest involves meticulous research and discussion with various academics as to what the building looked like above ground. And we're very proud of them. They're very successful.
Well, I visited both, and in the case of Llys Llywelyn, I think I experienced this time last year during the last food festival at St Fagans. I had a medieval feast there, and it is an extraordinary experience when you visit that kind of evening. But it's extraordinary anyway. But tell me, how exciting is it, or how special is it to be reconstructing a building that you may have passed on the street?
It's brilliant. It's really exciting. Unfortunately, I never got to drink there. I wasn't in Cardiff during the 90s and much of the noughties, really. I missed that opportunity, and I wasn't working for the museum when it was dismantled either.
Right.
But I am very pleased we managed to rescue this building. We've got one more building from Cardiff, which is the prefab from Gwesty'r.
Of course. And when does that date from?
Just after the Second World War.
But this, of course, is a building 159 years old. It dates from 1853. So tell us, Dafydd, a bit about the history. Where was the Vulcan Hotel?
Well, let me share my screen with you.
Wonderful.
And I'll be able to show you some images.
Oh, brilliant.
So how's that? Can you see that yet?
Yeah, lovely, yes.
All right, so this is the Vulcan Hotel, the building in question. It's a two-story brick-built Victorian pub, and the ground floor is tiled. And it cuts quite a lonely figure in this image, because by 2012, all of the surrounding buildings had been demolished. So this was the only building left of an area known as Newtown. So I'll just move to the next slide. All right, this is Cardiff Docks. At the very top of the picture, you can see the sea. And moving down, we see the east and west Bute Docks. This image was taken in 1951, by the way. And if we move down a little bit more, on the left-hand side, we see a tight cluster of terraced houses. So I'll zoom in one more time. And there we have the area known as Newtown. So that was built about 1830, 1840. And the Marquis of Bute was building Cardiff Docks. And he invited quite a lot of Irish people over to work at the docks, and he began building this area to house them. So, and then the famine in Ireland happened in around the 1840s. So even more Irish folk came over and settled in this very small area of about 200 houses just east of Cardiff city centre. At the back of the image, you see Tyndall Street, and at the front, you see Adam Street. And then running through the middle from left to right of the picture, you see the Newport to Cardiff railway line, which cut Newtown into two.
Yeah.
The bit nearest us then over time became known as Adamsdown. So if I zoom in one more time, and there you go, just on the left of the image, you might be able to make out quite a blurry Vulcan from 1951.
Oh, wow. Right to the far left there. Yes,
That's it, yeah.
Well, it plays a central role in that community, doesn't it? Gosh, it looks so much more natural, doesn't it, amongst the terrace streets that, well, what's there now? It's an empty old NCP car park opposite the atrium. Absolutely no character, no community. Like,
No,
well, so many of things like that.
Newtown was demolished in 1967.
Right.
The area was condemned as a slum in the 1930s. You've heard of Butetown and Grangetown. They're still there, but in the 19th century, you had Temperance Town, Herb Town or Crockerton, and Newtown. And those three communities have been dispersed now, unfortunately.
And there was a specific community of people here, weren't there? Who were they, Dafydd?
Well, they were the Irish. It was quite a multicultural community. You had Italians and Germans living there, but they were predominantly Irish. If I just move to the next slide.
Right.
So all that remains at the minute is Ellen Street, leading on to Rosemary Street. This is Tyndall Street, just in front of us. And the place is full of kind of brand new high-rise buildings and student flats. And then this sculpture on the other side of Tyndall Street was built by Cardiff artist David Mackey in 2005. And the paving slabs bear the names of all the Irish families that lived there.
Well.
Dwyer and O'Driscoll, names like that. And then this chap is the most famous resident of Newtown, Peerless Jim Driscoll. He was a British heavyweight champion, lightweight champion, featherweight even. He was a boxer, and he was known as the finest of the upright boxers. That old-fashioned standing vertically kind of fighting. And when he died in 1925, 100,000 people lined the streets of his funeral in Cardiff.
Yes, to Catay's graveyard. I visited his grave, and you know, it's easy to forget now, but certainly 100 years ago, he was the celeb, wasn't he? He was Cardiff's most famous citizen, and indeed a son of Newtown, you say?
That's it. The majority of the people worked in Cardiff Docks, and I'm sure his family did as well.
Right.
Either building the docks themselves or working at the docks. And quite a few of the women worked on the potato wharves, washing potatoes after they've just come off the ships.
Well.
Yeah.
Who else would have frequented this pub then?
Dockers and mariners, really, and there was space upstairs that would be rented out for people to stay. That's why it was called the Vulcan Hotel. When it was built, or when it was first registered as an alehouse, actually in 1853, it was known as the Vulcan Inn. They served the same function. There was a pub downstairs and lodgings upstairs.
Right. And what about the name then? I mean, the Vulcan, I mean, that's the god of fire, isn't it? So was it related at all to the steelworks nearby?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? This is the sign that was hanging over the Vulcan in 2012 when we dismantled it. And it shows Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, with his tongs, his hammer, standing by his anvil, forging the weapons of war.
Fine figure of a man.
Yeah. And he's always associated with heavy industry, where there'd be loads of fire and smoke. And you'd think the Vulcan was named because of its proximity to the Eastmoor Steelworks, formerly known as the Cardiff Docks Works. But the Vulcan was built 40 years before that.
Oh.
Before the ironworks were built. So we don't really know why the Vulcan's called the Vulcan. The only thing we can say is that the person who named it, the owner at the time, must have had some affinity with either the Vulcan character or heavy industry.
Okay. So
this is where more research is gonna help us.
Sure. Now, I've already heard the figure 1853.
Yes.
And yet, the reinterpretation or the versions that will be opened in St Fagans 2-3 years from now will be based around 1915. Why is that, Dafydd?
Well, it's a really important period in the history of Cardiff, really. In 1914, Cardiff exported 20 million tons of coal to the four corners of the earth, and the coal industry was at its height then. Also in 1915, obviously, it was during the First World War. The community of Newtown was still there and thriving and being active. And also, we know quite a lot about the period. There's a lady in this image here called Ellen Agatha McCarthy,
right,
who was the daughter of the landlord, Dennis, during 1915. And she was born in the Vulcan in 1915. And we interviewed her a few years ago so she could share a lot of information with us about what the Vulcan looked like on the inside and who its customers were and so on. And then her brother, I think, the landlord Dennis's, no, that's not right. The landlord Dennis's brother, Daniel,
right, yeah,
he fought on the French battlefield during the First World War. And unfortunately he died. And on the anniversary of his death, every year, this image of him would hang above the fireplace inside the Vulcan.
Oh, wow.
And of course, during 1914, the Vulcan underwent significant renovations. So by 1915, the look of the Vulcan as we know it was established. So there's a lot of good reasons why we chose 1915.
Okay, well, describe the Vulcan then. What did it look like?
Okay, there we are. Okay, so these two images are from a planning application submitted by the owners of the Vulcan in 1914.
Okay.
The black and white drawing shows us what the building looked like at the time, and the colour drawing shows us what they wanted the Vulcan to look like. So although they look quite similar, there's some significant changes going on. They applied to raise the roof of the building to create more height inside the rooms. They increased the number of windows on the first floor. And then at the ground floor, even though the facades look quite similar, they are different. And the earlier wooden frontage was replaced by a very similar looking ceramic tiled frontage.
Ah, the tiles. Now, this excites me because I'm a Cardiff girl, born and bred, and there's always something so evocative about our original Cardiff pubs. So we're talking about places like, well, one of the nearest pubs to the Vulcan, the Golden Cross, for example, or the old Model Inn or City Arms, the cottage in the centre of the city. There's something really, really, really striking and very, very personal to Cardiff in a way. Even if you go into the old library and the lovely tiled walk and the Pierhead building, of course, down in the bay. So I'm delighted to hear that tiles are involved here.
Yes, they were very fashionable at the turn of the century. The manufacturer Craven Dunhill Jackfield from Ironbridge, they produced the tiles, and they produced the tiles for a lot of Britain's tiled pubs, if you like. And they probably did the tiles for the Golden Cross as well.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's the exterior then.
That's it. So we're now looking at the ground plan of the interior of the building.
Wow.
So there was also renovations in 1901, and that changed the front half of the building from a bar full of little typical Victorian cubby holes. The Victorians liked drinking in their own small little rooms.
Right.
So in 1901, they applied to get rid of the older little rooms, increase the size of the bar, and open the space up a bit. By 1914, then they'd enlarged the bar and renovated different aspects, including fitting new and improved gents' urinals. So in the public bar at the front, it'd be standing room only. There wouldn't be any furniture in there. There's a little cubby hole, which isn't shown on the plan on the far right, but we know it did exist, called the jug and bottle.
What was that?
Well, this was an off license, essentially. You'd walk up with your jug or your bottle, and the person behind the bar would fill it up for you, and you'd take it home with you. But in 1914, 1915, we knew from the stories that Ellen McCarthy was telling us that that's where ladies would go and drink. They'd have
ladies were allowed in.
Well, that's the thing. Yes, they were in the Vulcan, even though in many pubs at the time, in the so-called public bar, women weren't allowed. There were signs saying no women in here.
Dear, dear.
Yeah. So there is this segregation. There's the public bar, which is for working men more than anything. There's the jug and bottle, which could be used for off license or for little a drinking spot for ladies. Right. But also beyond them, at the back of the building, was a smoke room. And this was a more comfortable room with tables and chairs where ladies and couples would go to drink. And the barman would make sure that the working men at the front wouldn't get to the back of the building so they wouldn't get disturbed.
I see. Now you mentioned the drink. What was on offer at the bar?
Yeah, I moved to this picture. So in 1907, there was a fire at the Eagle Brewery. So we can see the words Eagle Brewery on this tall grey building above the fire engine.
Oh, yes.
And that was the brewery that supplied the Vulcan Hotel.
Right.
The curving building next to it is the Owain Glyndŵr pub, which is still there in the middle of Cardiff in St John's Square.
Oh, yes, I know where I am now, opposite the church.
Yes, that's it. So the landlord, Dennis, and his wife, Julia, would walk from the Vulcan to the Eagle Brewery here every week to pay for last week's drink and to order this week's drink.
Right.
And what they had on offer were a range of beers, so Bass, Allsops, IPA, cider, perry, stout, and according to their advertisements, the finest Hungarian wines.
Goodness. What about food then?
Yeah, this idea of a gastropub, sitting down for a meal in a pub, it's not a Victorian idea. It's quite a comparatively recent idea. So there wasn't much food available in the Vulcan. So they probably had things like pickled eggs, pickled onions, maybe some nuts. But we know that Dennis, the landlord, would put out a little plate of bread and cheese on the counter. And that was purely to stop the working men getting too drunk and causing too much trouble, really.
Right.
And he also kept on the bar half a pint of beer. And he didn't drink, but he'd always hold the drink and chat, pretending he was drinking with the boys, as it were. Even
wow. What an emotionally intelligent landlord. So what about the stories? What about the people? I mean, I'm sure a huge part of the work as the building itself is reconstructed is actually trying to, well, discover a bit more historical context and, you know, trying to, well, populate the bar in a way with figures from history. Do we know, you know, any names or stories from various points in history over the past, you know, over the 159 years that the Vulcan was open?
Well, we're quite fortunate in a way that the Vulcan was in the papers quite often, not always for good things.
You know,
the Vulcan was always in the paper for selling beer out of licensing hours.
Oh. So
that was a very common thing, especially before the landlord Dennis took over. So in the earlier history of the Vulcan, the first, say, 50, 60 years, they're constantly in the paper for breaking the law.
Right.
This is some quotes from various newspapers of the period. So if we look at the top left one, Paul Begley was fined 10 shillings and costs at Cardiff on Tuesday for disorderly conduct in Adam Street and for willfully breaking 2 panes of plate glass in the bar window of the Vulcan Inn.
What's a hooligan?
So as this was December 1914, we think that he'd broken the brand new windows of the Vulcan. And then that's when they put in the leaded windows that we might be familiar with. And then on the lower right, another advert, which is quite common in the newspapers, wanted a good country girl with good references at once to be a general servant to help probably the landlord's wife. Not necessarily serving ales, but to do the laundry and all that kind of thing.
I see.
These adverts are in the papers quite often because it seems these good country girls didn't particularly get on at the Vulcan or being in Cardiff, and there seems to be a quick turnaround of those. There's another story, bottom left, dead fowls in a sack. And what happened was the police chased a chap through the Vulcan Hotel where he ditched a sack with 2 dead birds in it. And he got caught and he said, what else can I do? I can't get work.
Oh.
And that kind of shows you that when Cardiff was at its height, a huge economic boom and the greatest port in the world, its citizens were still poor, and crushingly poor in some cases. In the little terraced houses of Newtown, there may have been up to 10 people living in each.
Yes.
But they loved living there, and they loved each other as well. There's another story where the police turn up at Newtown during the First World War to arrest a German doctor. And I think they wanted to arrest him purely because he was German and he could have been a spy working for the enemy.
Gosh.
So the people in Newtown, when they saw what was happening, they blocked the police's path and said, look, you can't have him, he's one of ours. So these stories add such a richness to our knowledge of the period. So it's important we collect as much as we can.
Yes, of course. Actually, we've had several questions or remarks here, and one here from Jane Ormrod. Great news, Dafydd, that the rebuilding is going well. 3 years to complete sounds like a long time. What else needs to be done before opening?
Well, we've got to build the first floor. We've got to put a roof on it. We've got to build 3 ornate chimneys. And then we've got to fit out the inside of the buildings. Painting, decorating, build a new bar, all of that. Then we've got to figure out the interpretation, how that's going to work, and install that in. So it's always a long process, moving and rebuilding historic buildings, because there's so many different aspects that depends on thorough research, because this is an exact, we've dismantled the Vulcan and we've moved it and it's millimeter accurate, you know, so we can't rush things.
No.
And we have to be really thorough in our investigations so that we're certain that we're doing a decent job.
This kind of information that you've just shared with us, you know, that hits us on a gut level when we understand some of the tensions that maybe were present in the pub or around the pub in the area. And of course, it wasn't the only pub in Newtown, wasn't it? Even though it's a fairly small area of Cardiff.
Well, yes, there's about 200 pubs, 200 houses, about 6 streets. And at about this time, say 1900, I think there were about 8 pubs. There's pretty much one on each street, maybe more in some cases. The Victorian period, they just went crazy for building pubs.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, they're all closing down now, but that's why it was important to get a pub, especially this one.
Yeah, when we think of the location of the Vulcan, certainly I pass it, you know, whenever I'm driving to town. And of course, it's just an emptiness there now, the car park. But I consider it to be very, very close to the city centre. Would it have been considered a central pub at the time?
No, it wouldn't have. That's a good question, really. The easiest thing is to draw a comparison with the Vulcan and the Golden Cross, a pub which is, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a mile away, probably a bit less.
Yeah.
That had a tiled bar. The walls were tiled. A lot of money was spent on that pub, where only half the money was spent on the Vulcan. So it wasn't an inner city pub. It was always on the outskirts of the centre of town. So its status was lower, if you like.
Right. What about the more recent history then? What do we know about the time, well, from the 2 world wars towards mid-20th century? Did you have a lot of information from that time?
Well, yes, there's always more to learn, obviously. I'll move the slide forward just so you can see. So we interviewed Mel and Rona Rees, who were landlords of the Vulcan during the early 80s.
Okay.
So that was really informative. When they took the pub over, it was really run down. When they pulled the beer taps, loads of little flies would fly out.
Oh.
So they demanded a new bar counter from the brewery and some new equipment and new pubs. But their darts tournaments were very popular. And we've got loads of their photographs. I haven't included them on this because we need permission from everyone in the photograph. But people are having a great time there.
That's wonderful that you've got the information provided by the Reeses and the McCarthys before that. Was it the kind of pub where, you know, there was a whole generation who were familiar with one particular family, or did it have a number of landlords across the years?
Well, as the pub was about, you know, we're not sure when the pub first opened. It's mentioned in the newspapers in 1849, and it was two terraced houses knocked together, but we can't say when that happened. So the Vulcan's been in a pub for, let's say, 150, 170 years even. So you'd expect it to have quite a few landlords. But we've counted 54 landlords.
Wow!
Which is quite a significant number, really.
Yeah, so even in 159 years.
Yeah. So there's always a high turnover.
Why was that, I wonder?
Well, I think it's to do with just the size of the pub. It's always quite a small building.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't think you could squeeze enough people in there to make a decent profit or to make a decent living.
Oh, right.
There's always this turnaround, you know.
Now, you've mentioned the hotel aspect. We've got a question here. Thank you, Hayley Beer. Did you, Dafydd, Principal Curator of Historic Buildings, did you think about opening it as a hotel again? Would be so cool to spend the night at St Fagans. Oh, I'll second that.
That's a great idea, isn't it? During this phase, when we open the Vulcan in a couple of years' time, it'll only be the ground floor that's open to the public.
Oh.
The reason for that is true for a number of our buildings, is that we have to provide equal access so that it's accessible to everyone. So that would involve the construction of a lift, really.
Oh, yeah.
We hide it so it wouldn't be intrusive or anything. So we'll hope to do that in the future and maybe have a little exhibition about the Vulcan's more recent history, say, upstairs.
But no plans for a 5-star hotel or even a 1-star hotel?
Well, believe it or not, we sometimes consider that. You know, it'd be great if we could get people to spend the night in one of our buildings. It offers such an immersive experience for people. They'd get a whole new perspective on being there. And some of them obviously are quite spooky as well.
Oh, especially during your Halloween events. That would be really cool. Yeah. Now, I remember now, and like you, I did visit the Vulcan. Not too far from when it actually closed in 2012. I remember being invited there by a friend of mine who was an active campaigner with the group Save the Vulcan. And I know there was a lot of emotion. You know, there's a lot of campaigning in Cardiff. The most recent example was, for example, you know, when Goody Hoo at Guildford Crescent was forced to close. There's a lot of heart, and many people see their pubs or their favourite pub or even an old Cardiff pub as, well, part of the furniture, part of the civic family in a way. And I do remember there was quite a lot of activity at the time, and it was interesting. It very much was an experience of travelling back in time, because it wasn't one of these 90s pubs that was rejigged and, you know, for brand new generation. It really was, it did feel like going back in time. I didn't, as a female, I didn't visit the men's urinals, however, and I remember people saying that they were quite significant. Why was that?
They are. I've got a picture I can show you in a bit. They were kind of bright orange, that's why.
Oh.
They were put in 1914. There's a set of 3 of them, and you just don't see them anywhere. Most urinals are white. And yeah, so they'll go back in, we'll get them restored, and yeah, they're orange. That's the thing, really.
Why did it close in 2012?
Yeah, I'll change my picture. It closed because it was too small. Brains Brewery decided it was not financially viable, really, because you can't get enough people in there to make enough money and so on. So Brains decided to close the pub in 2009. So the Save the Vulcan campaign was established, and they campaigned tirelessly and petitioned Welsh government and tried to get the building listed and things like that. They won a reprieve of 3 years, so the Vulcan stayed open until 2012. But unfortunately, they're unsuccessful, and the Vulcan was forced to close. And the building was offered to us then.
Yeah, so the building was offered to us, or the museum rather. Now, tell me, Dafydd, how special then is the pub? How is it the Vulcan itself that really excites you, or what is so extraordinary about the Vulcan and its addition to St Fagans?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, really. The Vulcan was clearly special, especially to those who drank in it and lived and worked nearby it. But in another sense, it wasn't special.
Oh.
That's why we wanted it. None of our collection of about 50 historic buildings really were unique or special or architecturally significant in their day.
Well.
They're special because they're very rare these days, and they can allow us to interpret a way of life that is equally rare and that has now vanished,
Yeah.
So the pub's really important in that sense. Yeah, so, there were hundreds and thousands of Victorian pubs built, and there's very few of them left.
Mm. You've mentioned your hopes, to stage a kind of immersive experience. Well, let's get down to basics. We've got 2 questions here. Chomping at the bit is Hayley Beer once more, and also Joe Oliver. So Hayley asks, will we be able to have a real pint at the bar when it's open? And Joe asks a very similar question. Will you be selling beer there?
We will. Yes.
Hooray!
That's good news all around. We couldn't really have a pub and not sell alcohol in it.
Absolutely not.
So that's the intention. It'd be fantastic if we could brew a beer from the period that matches the interpretation date.
Wow, wouldn't it? I mean, is it possible? You have all that agriculture land.
Well, that's another thing. You're suggesting we grow our own hops and barley, or what?
Yes.
That's another step. But hopefully we can work with a local brewery and develop our own beer.
Wow, what a prospect.
Yeah, we'll be serving alcohol in there.
How about the chances of a lock-in, Dafydd? What will the hours be?
Well, it won't be acting as a proper pub because it will be sticking to the museum opening hours.
Oh, boo-hiss.
So the earliest it would open is 10 and the latest it would close is 5, unfortunately.
Oh, that's fairly reasonable.
Yes, that's what I think.
Well, that's interesting that we've had 2 people inquire along the same lines. Well, it certainly shows the thirst that people have, the public have, for this brand new acquisition. How much excitement is there, Dafydd, about this addition to St Fagans?
Well, a lot, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
People are more excited about this building than pretty much any other.
Cool.
We get asked constantly, when will it be open?
Okay.
You know, the reality, I suppose, is a lot of people didn't drink in the Vulcan, but they're really excited and supportive about this pub because they're aware that pubs are closing across the land at a rate of knots. So this pub is almost symbolic of the loss that we're suffering of closing pubs.
Fundamentally, what is the worth of a pub to a community?
Oh, it's a community centre. It's a hub where people can come together, make friends, be friends, let their hair down, and just be themselves and be together as a community. It's a community hall, as I mentioned.
Mm. Well, I can't bring this fascinating session to an end without asking you, how can people get in touch with the museum? I know it's a funny old time now, isn't it? And it's extraordinary to think that the work has continued during lockdown. That's very, very reassuring. So if people have any memories or reminiscences or, you know, paraphernalia, how can they get hold of you?
Well, we'd love to hear from anyone with willing to share their stories of their time in the Vulcan from any period, as well as photographs from any period, because they're really valuable to us as well. But they can get in touch with us quite easily through the website or social media like Twitter or what have you. So yeah, we'd really welcome people to get in touch. Oh, well,
I don't know about you. I'm so glad to see so many people have reached out during this session. Obviously, there is a thirst for information, any information about this brand new edition. I'm sure we all, well, wish you and the whole team well, whatever happens next. This is going to be a really, really, really special addition to, well, such a wonderful, wonderful visitor attraction. Dafydd, hoffwn ni ddweud diolch yn fawr. I'd like to thank you so much for, well, feeding our thirst in a way, or no, that is a mixed metaphor. I'd like to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and definitely spread the news, everyone, far and wide. The Vulture will, the Vulcan will hopefully be open in 3 years' time, so please get in touch. I know that Dafydd and all at the Museum Wales would love to hear from you. In the meantime, diolch yn fawr iawn, Dafydd Wiliam, Principal Curator of Historic Buildings at St Fagans.
Thank you all. Diolch yn fawr.